In a quiet little hospital tucked away in the countryside, life moved at its own gentle pace. The building was old but cozy, with creaky wooden floors and walls painted in soft pastel colors that gave it a warm, welcoming feel. It wasn't one of those big city hospitals buzzing with activity. Instead, it had an air of calmness, almost like a home away from home for both patients and staff. Among the nurses who worked there, Clara Hayes stood out, not just because of her bright smile, or the way she always seemed to hum cheerful tunes as she walked down the hallways, but because of her unwavering dedication to her patients. Clara had been working at the hospital for nearly 5 years, and everyone knew her as someone who went above and beyond for the people under her care. Whether it was staying late to comfort a frightened child or finding creative ways to lift the spirits of elderly residents, Clara poured her heart into everything she did. So when a mysterious new patient arrived one chilly autumn morning, it came as no surprise that Clara immediately took an interest in him. The man was found unconscious on a remote hiking trail by a group of hikers. He had no wallet, no phone, and no identification. Nothing to hint at who he was or where he came from. When paramedics brought him to the hospital, his condition was stable but puzzling. There were no visible injuries aside from minor scrapes and bruises, yet he showed no signs of waking up. Doctors ran tests after tests, but all results came back normal. His brain activity suggested he wasn't in a coma, but rather in some sort of unresponsive state that left them baffled. With no name to call him by, the staff simply referred to him as Mr. Gray, a placeholder inspired by the color of the blanket draped over him during his first days in the hospital. For weeks, Mr. Gray remained silent and still, lying motionless in his bed. Most of the staff treated him with professional detachment, checking his vitals and ensuring he was comfortable, but not expecting much change. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than met the eye. She noticed tiny details others seemed to overlook, how his fingers twitched slightly when someone spoke near him, or how his breathing pattern changed when the room grew noisy. To Clara, these weren't random reflexes. They were clues pointing to something deeper. Determined to connect with him, Clara started spending extra time by his bedside. At first, she would sit quietly, observing his face for any reaction. Then, one day she decided to talk to him as if he could hear every word. "Hi there," she began softly, leaning closer so her voice carried clearly. "I'm Clara. I'll be taking care of you while you're here." She paused, waiting for any sign of acknowledgement, but none came. Still, she continued, chatting about mundane things, the weather outside, the delicious smell of coffee wafting from the cafeteria, the funny antics of her golden retriever, Max. Day after day, she returned to share stories, read passages from books and play music she thought might soothe him. As the weeks turned into months, Clara's visits became a routine. She brought small gifts too, a potted plant to brighten his room, a playlist of calming songs on her phone, even a sketch pad and colored pencils in case he ever felt inclined to draw. Though he never responded directly, Clara swore she saw glimpses of awareness in his eyes. Sometimes when she held his hand and asked simple questions like, "Can you squeeze my hand if you can hear me?" she felt the faintest pressure against her palm. These moments kept her going, fueling her belief that he was locked inside himself, unable to break free. Her colleagues admired her persistence, though some teased her gently about getting too attached. "He's probably not even aware, Clara," one nurse remarked one day. "You're wasting your energy on someone who might never wake up." But Clara shook her head firmly. "Even if he doesn't understand everything, I know he feels something," she replied. "And until we figure out what's keeping him trapped, I'm not giving up." What made Clara's efforts truly remarkable was how personal they felt. She didn't treat Mr. Gray as just another patient. She treated him like a friend. On weekends, she'd bring in homemade cookies or a thermos of hot chocolate, setting them on the table beside his bed as if he might suddenly sit up and ask for a snack. During holidays, she decorated his room with paper snowflakes or miniature pumpkins, determined to make him feel included in the festivities. Even when exhaustion crept in from long shifts, Clara always found the energy to visit him before heading home. Despite her optimism, there were moments of doubt. Late at night, as she sat alone in the dimly lit room, watching his chest rise and fall with each breath, Clara wondered if she was chasing a lost cause. Was she imagining the flickers of recognition in his gaze? Could he really sense her presence? Or was she projecting her own hopes onto him? Yet whenever these thoughts surfaced, she reminded herself why she chose this profession in the first place: to help others, no matter how challenging the circumstances. One particular afternoon stands out in Clara's memory. It was raining heavily outside, the kind of storm that makes you want to curl up indoors with a good book. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Clara entered Mr. Gray's room carrying a novel she'd borrowed from the library. Settling into the chair beside his bed, she opened the book and began reading aloud. Her voice filled the silence, weaving tales of adventure and courage. Halfway through the chapter, lightning flashed, illuminating the room briefly. In that split second, Clara caught a glimpse of something extraordinary. Mr. Gray's lips parted ever so slightly as if he were trying to speak. Her heart skipped a beat. Had she imagined it? Shaking off her disbelief, Clara leaned closer. "Did you want to say something?" she whispered, her tone tinged with excitement. No sound came, but his eyes met hers, and for the first time, Clara felt certain he understood her. From that moment on, she redoubled her efforts, knowing deep down that the man known only as Mr. Gray was slowly emerging from the shadows of silence. Little did she know, their journey together was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would reveal secrets hidden far beyond the confines of the hospital walls. As the weeks turned into months, Clara's bond with Mr. Gray deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. What began as a professional duty had transformed into something far more personal, a quiet, unspoken connection that grew stronger with each passing day. Clara wasn't just his caregiver anymore. She was his companion, his advocate, and perhaps even his lifeline to the world outside his silent cocoon. Every interaction, no matter how small, became a step forward in their shared journey. Clara noticed subtle changes in Mr. Gray that others might have missed. One morning, while adjusting the curtains to let in sunlight, she felt his fingers twitch slightly beneath hers. At first, she thought it was a coincidence, but when she gently squeezed his hand and asked, "Can you feel this?" his response came almost immediately, a weak but deliberate squeeze in return. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send a wave of hope coursing through her. From then on, Clara made it a point to include physical touch in their routine. She'd hold his hand during conversations, pat his shoulder lightly, or rest her palm on his arm when she spoke softly to him. Each gesture seemed to draw him closer to the surface, pulling him out of the depths of his silence little by little. The breakthroughs weren't limited to physical responses. Over time, Mr. Gray began showing signs of understanding what Clara said. When she read aloud from books or told stories about her day, his eyes would follow her movements intently, as if hanging onto every word. One afternoon, while describing a funny incident involving her dog Max chasing a squirrel in the park, Clara paused mid-story and glanced at him. To her astonishment, the corners of his mouth curved upward ever so slightly. A faint smile, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized he was not only listening, but also reacting emotionally. That tiny smile was proof that he was still in there, waiting for the right moment to emerge fully. Encouraged by these developments, Clara decided to create a structured routine, tailored specifically for Mr. Gray. Mornings started with gentle stretches, where she guided his limbs through basic exercises to prevent stiffness. Though he couldn't move independently, she could tell he appreciated the effort because his breathing would steady and relax as she worked. Afternoons were reserved for storytelling sessions, during which Clara brought books ranging from adventure novels to poetry collections. Sometimes she'd pause after reading a particularly vivid passage and ask, "What do you think of that?" Even though he couldn't answer verbally, his gaze often lingered on her face as if willing her to continue. Evenings were special. They belonged to music and quiet reflection. Clara discovered early on that Mr. Gray responded well to certain melodies. Classical pieces like Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata or Debussy's Clair de Lune seemed to resonate with him deeply. On nights when storms rolled in, filling the hospital with the rumble of thunder and flashes of lightning, Clara stayed late to play calming tunes on her phone, placing the speaker close to his bed. The music acted as a buffer against the chaos, outside wrapping them both in a cocoon of tranquility. Once, during a particularly fierce storm, Clara sat beside him, holding his hand and humming along to the melody. As the thunder peaked, she felt his grip tighten slightly, a silent plea for reassurance. Without hesitation, she leaned closer and whispered, "It's okay. I'm here." His grip relaxed almost instantly, and Clara knew then that trust was forming between them, fragile yet undeniable. Despite her growing optimism, Clara faced challenges that tested her resolve. Some days, progress seemed non-existent, leaving her frustrated and disheartened. There were moments when Mr. Gray appeared completely unresponsive, his body limp and his expression blank. During those times, doubt crept in, whispering cruel thoughts. What if he never wakes up? What if all your efforts are in vain? But Clara refused to let negativity take root. Instead, she reminded herself of the small victories, the squeezes, the smiles, the flickers of recognition, and drew strength from them. Her colleagues noticed her unwavering dedication and admired her for it, though they occasionally voiced concerns. "Clara, you're spending so much time with him," one nurse remarked, gently one evening. "You need to take care of yourself too. What happens if things don't turn out the way you hope?" Clara smiled faintly but remained resolute. "I know it's a risk," she replied, "but I can't abandon him now. Not when I see glimpses of who he is underneath all this. He deserves a chance just like anyone else." To keep herself motivated, Clara began documenting their progress in a journal. Each entry captured the highs and lows of their journey. The first time he moved his fingers, the first hint of a smile, the first time his eyes followed her across the room. Writing it all down helped her see how far they'd come, even on days when it felt like they were standing still. She also included personal reflections, jotting down thoughts about what Mr. Gray might be feeling or thinking based on his reactions. These musings gave her insight into his inner world and strengthened her belief that he was slowly awakening. One of the most profound moments occurred on a crisp winter morning. Snow blanketed the ground outside, casting a soft glow over the hospital grounds. Clara entered Mr. Gray's room carrying a tray of hot cocoa and 2 mugs. Setting the tray aside, she pulled up a chair and poured the steaming liquid into one mug. Holding it near his nose, she said, "Do you remember the smell of snow? Fresh and clean like nothing else in the world." For a brief second, his nostrils flared slightly, as if inhaling the aroma. Encouraged, Clara took a sip of the cocoa and described its warmth spreading through her chest. "It's comforting, isn't it?" she murmured. Then, surprising even herself, she added, "If you could talk, what would you say right now?" Silence hung heavy in the air, but Clara didn't feel awkward. She waited patiently, watching his face for any sign of response. Slowly, his lips parted, not wide enough to form words, but enough to suggest an attempt. Clara froze, her heart pounding. Was he trying to speak? She leaned closer, her voice trembling with excitement. "It's okay. You can try again. I'm listening." Though no sound emerged, the effort itself was monumental. Clara clasped his hand tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "That was amazing," she whispered. "You're doing so well. I promise, we'll get there together." These incremental steps fueled Clara's determination to push further. She started incorporating new elements into their daily routine, such as writing exercises. Using a marker board, she wrote simple questions like, "Are you comfortable?" or "Do you like the music?" and held them up for him to see. If he blinked twice, she interpreted it as a yes. Once, a no. This method allowed them to communicate in rudimentary ways, giving Clara a glimpse into his preferences and needs. It was slow and painstaking work, but each successful exchange reinforced her faith in his eventual recovery. Through it all, Clara, never lost sight of the bigger picture. While the medical team continued running tests and consulting specialists, she focused on nurturing the human being behind the patient label. She treated Mr. Gray not as a case to solve, but as a person, deserving of dignity, respect, and love. Her compassion extended beyond mere caregiving. It was an act of kindness that transcended boundaries, bridging the gap between silence and speech, despair and hope. And so, as winter gave way to spring, Clara's efforts bore fruit in ways she hadn't imagined. Mr. Gray's responsiveness increased steadily, his body becoming more animated with each passing week. He began tracking objects with his eyes, turning his head toward sounds and even attempting lip movements when prompted. Though he remained silent, the transformation was undeniable. Clara could sense that he was inching closer to breaking free from the prison of his own mind, and she vowed to stay by his side until the day he finally found his voice. Unbeknownst to her, that day was closer than she thought. Hidden beneath the layers of silence lay truths waiting to be uncovered, truths that would change not only Mr. Gray's life, but Clara's as well. Their journey was far from over, but one thing was certain. The bond they shared had become unbreakable, forged in the fires of patience, perseverance, and unwavering belief in the power of human connection. The weeks that followed were filled with anticipation, as if the air around Clara and Mr. Gray crackled with the promise of something extraordinary on the horizon. Clara's daily routine remained unchanged: morning stretches, afternoon storytelling, and evenings bathed in soft music. But now there was an undercurrent of excitement. Every interaction felt charged with possibility, every movement scrutinized for meaning. She wasn't just waiting for progress. She was actively nurturing it, coaxing it into existence with her unwavering patience and care. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Clara settled into her usual chair beside Mr. Gray's bed. The hospital was quiet, save for the occasional hum of a machine or the distant murmur of voices from the nurses' station. It was during these calm moments that Clara allowed herself to dream about what lay ahead. What would Mr. Gray sound like when he finally spoke? Would his voice be deep and gravelly, or soft and melodic? And more importantly, what would he say? First, these questions swirled in her mind as she opened a book and began reading aloud, her voice steady and soothing. As she reached the end of a particularly suspenseful chapter, Clara paused and glanced at him. His eyes were fixed on her face, wide and alert as though he were hanging on to her next words. Smiling, she said, "I wonder what you'd think of this story. Do you like mysteries?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, his lips parted. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Was he trying to speak again? Leaning closer, she whispered, "It's okay. Take your time." The room seemed to hold its breath as Mr. Gray struggled to form a sound. His brow furrowed with effort and his jaw moved slightly, but no words came out. Still, Clara didn't waver. She placed a reassuring hand on his arm and said, "You can do this, I'm here." After several tense seconds, he relaxed, his body sinking back against the pillows. Though he hadn't succeeded, Clara felt a surge of pride. He was trying, and that was enough. Over the next few days, these attempts became more frequent. Sometimes, they occurred spontaneously, triggered by a word or phrase Clara used in conversation. Other times, she deliberately encouraged him by asking simple questions like, "Do you want me to keep reading?" Or, "Shall I play some music?" Each time, his response was hesitant, a faint movement of his lips, a shaky exhalation, but undeniable. It was as though his vocal cords, dormant for so long, were slowly waking up, relearning how to function. Clara celebrated every small victory, no matter how minor. When Mr. Gray managed to produce a raspy noise one afternoon, she clapped her hands excitedly and exclaimed, "That was wonderful. You're getting there." Her enthusiasm was contagious, lifting the spirits of everyone around them. Even the doctors, who had initially been skeptical about his potential for recovery, began to take notice. They ordered additional tests to monitor his progress, marveling at the improvements in his motor skills and cognitive responses. Despite the encouraging signs, Clara knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Speaking required coordination between the brain, muscles, and respiratory system, a complex process that could take time to master. To help Mr. Gray regain control over his voice, Clara introduced new exercises designed to strengthen his vocal apparatus. She started by having him practice breathing techniques, guiding him through slow, deliberate inhales and exhales. Once he grew comfortable with that, she added humming exercises, encouraging him to produce low, steady tones. At first, the sounds he made were weak and inconsistent, but with practice, they grew stronger and clearer. Music played a crucial role in this phase of his recovery. Clara discovered that certain songs resonated deeply with Mr. Gray, evoking emotional responses that motivated him to participate more actively. One evening, while playing a hauntingly beautiful rendition of Hallelujah by Jeff Buckley, she noticed his lips moving faintly, as if attempting to sing along. Intrigued, she rewound the track and played it again, this time mouthing the lyrics, silently so he could follow along. To her amazement, he joined in, his hoarse voice blending imperfectly but poignantly with the melody. Tears streamed down Clara's face as she realized the significance of the moment. This wasn't just a step forward, it was a leap. Word of Mr. Gray's progress spread quickly among the hospital staff, drawing curious visitors to his room. Some came out of professional interest, eager to witness the phenomenon firsthand, while others simply wanted to offer their support. Clara welcomed their presence, knowing that positive reinforcement could boost Mr. Gray's confidence. However, she remained vigilant, ensuring that interactions stayed respectful and non-intrusive. Above all, she guarded their special bond, making sure no one overshadowed the connection they had built together. As spring blossomed outside, bringing with it a sense of renewal, Clara noticed subtle shifts in Mr. Gray's demeanor. He seemed more engaged, his expressions livelier and more expressive. Occasionally, he would raise his eyebrows or tilt his head inquisitively, as though prompting her to elaborate on something she'd said. During one memorable session, Clara described a recent trip to the local farmer's market, where she'd bought fresh strawberries and homemade jam. As she recounted the vibrant colors and enticing aromas, Mr. Gray's lips curved into a broad smile, the kind that reached his eyes and lingered long after the story ended. It was a reminder that joy could transcend barriers, finding its way, even into the most unlikely places. But perhaps the most transformative moment came late one night, when the hospital was shrouded in darkness and silence. Clara had stayed late to finish charting notes, and as she passed Mr. Gray's room on her way out, she noticed him staring at the ceiling, his expression thoughtful. Curious, she stepped inside and asked softly, "Can't sleep?" His eyes darted toward her, locking onto hers with an intensity that took her aback. Slowly, deliberately, he opened his mouth and formed a single syllable. "No." Clara's heart skipped a beat. Though the word was barely audible, rough and halting, it was unmistakable. For the first time in months, Mr. Gray had spoken. Overwhelmed, with emotion, Clara sank into the chair beside his bed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You actually did it." He blinked once, acknowledging her praise, then closed his eyes, exhausted from the effort. That night marked a turning point in their journey. From then on, Mr. Gray's speech improved steadily, though it remained labored and uneven. With Clara's guidance, he practiced forming words and short phrases, gradually building his confidence. She cheered him on every step of the way, celebrating each milestone as if it were a personal triumph. Together, they worked through challenges, navigating the frustrations and setbacks with patience and determination. Yet, despite the progress, questions lingered in Clara's mind. Who was this man whose resilience inspired her so deeply? What secrets lay buried beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered? And why had he remained silent for so long, only to emerge now, piece by fragile piece? These mysteries weighed heavily on her thoughts, fueling her curiosity and driving her to dig deeper. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window, casting golden patterns on the floor, Clara decided to broach the subject directly. Sitting beside him, she clasped his hand and said gently, When you're ready, I'd love to hear your story. Who are you, really? For a long moment he stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he replied, "Not Gray." The word sent a shiver down Clara's spine. Not Gray? What did that mean? Before she could press further, exhaustion overtook him and he drifted off to sleep. But Clara knew one thing for certain. The truth was close. So close she could almost feel it brushing against her fingertips. All they needed was time. And, as she sat there, watching his chest rise and fall with each peaceful breath, she vowed to stay by his side until every secret was revealed, until the man hidden behind the silence stepped fully into the light. The stormy night that followed was one Clara would never forget. Thunder rolled across the sky like a restless beast, shaking the hospital walls and rattling the windows. Rain lashed against the glass, creating an eerie rhythm that echoed through the dimly lit hallways. Most of the staff had already retreated to quieter corners of the building, leaving only a skeleton crew to tend to the patients. But Clara stayed by Mr. Gray's side, unable to leave him alone during such chaos. She knew how much he disliked loud noises, and tonight, the storm seemed particularly relentless. Clara entered his room carrying a small lantern she'd borrowed from the supply closet. Its warm glow cast flickering shadows on the walls, softening the harshness of the fluorescent lights overhead. Setting it down on the bedside table, she pulled up her usual chair and sat close to him, resting her hand lightly on his arm. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here with you." His eyes darted toward hers, wide and anxious, as another clap of thunder shook the room. Instinctively, Clara leaned closer, speaking soothingly over the noise. "The storm will pass soon. Just focus on my voice." For several minutes she talked quietly, sharing snippets of her childhood, how she used to hide under the covers during storms, clutching her favorite stuffed bear, until her mother sang her back to sleep. Her stories seemed to have a calming effect. His breathing slowed and the tension in his body eased slightly. Encouraged, Clara continued, weaving tales of simpler times when life felt less complicated. As she spoke, she noticed his lips moving faintly, almost imperceptibly. At first she thought it might be another attempt at speech, but then she realized he was mouthing words along with her, a silent echo of her own voice. Curious, Clara paused mid-sentence. "Are you trying to say something?" she asked gently. He hesitated, his gaze flickering between her face and the ceiling. Then, summoning what little strength he had, he whispered hoarsely, "Thank you." The two words hung in the air, fragile yet profound, sending a wave of emotion crashing over Clara. Tears welled up in her eyes as she squeezed his hand tightly, overwhelmed by the weight of those simple syllables. After months of silence, he had finally spoken, not just random sounds or fragmented attempts, but real, meaningful words. Her voice trembled as she replied, "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad you're here." For a moment, they sat in silence, the storm, raging outside, forgotten. Then, gathering her composure, Clara added softly, "But if there's anything else you want to say, now's the time." She watched as he struggled internally, his brow furrowing with concentration. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he managed to whisper, "Not Gray." The phrase sent a jolt through Clara. Not Gray? What did he mean? Was he rejecting the name the hospital staff had given him? Or was it something deeper, a clue to his true identity? Her mind raced with possibilities, but before she could ask for clarification, exhaustion overtook him, and his eyelids fluttered shut. Clara sat there, staring at his sleeping form, replaying his words over and over in her head. Not Gray. It wasn't much, but it was enough to ignite a spark of curiosity that refused to fade. The next morning, Clara wasted no time bringing the matter to the attention of the medical team. Dr. Patel, the lead physician overseeing Mr. Gray's case, listened intently as Clara recounted the events of the previous night. "He said not Gray?" the doctor repeated, his tone thoughtful. "That's intriguing. Could he be implying that he remembers his real name? Clara nodded eagerly. It's possible. He's been making so much progress lately, it wouldn't surprise me if fragments of his memory are starting to surface. Dr. Patel ordered a series of cognitive tests to assess Mr. Gray's mental state further. Meanwhile, Clara took it upon herself to encourage him to share more. During their sessions, she began asking open-ended questions designed to jog his memory. Do you remember where you lived before? She'd ask. Or, is there anyone you miss talking to? Though his responses were limited, each answer brought them closer to uncovering the truth. One afternoon, while playing a familiar melody on her phone, Clara noticed a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Stopping the music, she leaned forward and asked, "Does this remind you of something? A place, maybe? Or a person?" He hesitated, his lips twitching as though searching for the right words. Then, in a raspy voice, he muttered, "Lake house." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "A lake house," she repeated, her excitement barely contained. "Was it yours? Did you live there?" He nodded weakly, his expression distant as if transported to another time and place. Encouraged by this breakthrough, Clara pressed further. Who else was there? Family? Friends? Again, he hesitated, his jaw working silently before he managed to whisper Evelyn. The name sent a shiver down Clara's spine. Evelyn. A sister? A wife? A friend? Whoever she was, Clara sensed she was important, a key piece of the puzzle they were piecing together. Determined to find answers, Clara shared the new information with Dr. Patel, who immediately contacted local authorities. Investigators combed through missing persons reports, looking for anyone matching Mr. Gray's description, and connected to someone named Evelyn. Days passed without results, and frustration began creeping in. But then, late one evening, Clara received a call from Dr. Patel. "We found him," the doctor said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "His real name is James Carter. He's been missing for over a year." The revelation hit Clara like a tidal wave. James Carter. Not Gray. The man she'd cared for so devotedly finally had a name, and with it came a flood of questions. Why had he disappeared? What had driven him into hiding? And why had he remained silent for so long? Clara couldn't wait to hear his side of the story, but she knew better than to rush him. Instead, she approached the topic delicately, choosing her words carefully. "James," she said softly the next day, sitting beside him as usual. "Is that your name?" He turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze. After a long pause, he nodded. "Once." Clara smiled warmly, her heart swelling with pride. "It suits you," she said. "Can you tell me about Evelyn? Who is she?" At the mention of the name, a shadow crossed his face, and for a moment, Clara feared she'd pushed too far. But then, in a halting voice, he began to speak. "She's my sister," he whispered. "We fought. About money. About trust." Each word was a struggle, but Clara listened intently, piecing together the fragments of his story. Over the next few days, James revealed bits and pieces of his past. He spoke of a family business embroiled in scandal, accusations of fraud, and a decision to flee everything he knew in search of safety. The accident on the hiking trail, he believed, had been caused by someone chasing him or perhaps his own panic getting the better of him. Whatever the cause, it had left him stranded, injured, and ultimately unconscious until his discovery by hikers. As the full picture emerged, Clara understood why James had chosen silence. In his vulnerable state, speaking would have meant exposing himself to danger, judgment, or worse. Staying quiet had been his way of protecting whatever remnants of his old life he still clung to. But now, with Clara's unwavering support and the promise of resolution, he was ready to step out of the shadows. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when investigators traced Evelyn's whereabouts. She was living in a nearby city, unaware that her brother had been found alive. When Clara broke the news to James, his reaction was immediate and visceral. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "Tell her. I'm sorry." It was a plea born of regret and longing, a desperate desire to mend the bridges he'd burned. With Evelyn informed and eager to reunite with her long-lost brother, preparations began for James's transition out of the hospital. As Clara helped him pack his belongings, few as they were, she couldn't help but reflect on their journey together. From the silent stranger lying motionless in a bed to the man who now spoke his truth, James had come farther than anyone could have imagined. And though their paths were destined to diverge, Clara knew she'd carry the lessons of their bond with her forever. On the day of his departure, Clara stood by the hospital doors, watching as James climbed into the car that would take him to Evelyn. Before leaving, he turned to her, his voice stronger than it had ever been. "Thank you," he said simply, his eyes filled with gratitude. Clara smiled, waving goodbye as the car drove away. Though their chapter had ended, she knew James's story was just beginning, one marked not by silence but by redemption, reconciliation, and hope. The reunion between James and his sister Evelyn was nothing short of emotional. When Clara accompanied James to the small cafe where they had agreed to meet, she could feel the weight of anticipation in the air. Evelyn arrived first, her face a mix of hope and apprehension as she scanned the room. The moment she spotted James walking toward her with Clara's support, her expression crumbled into tears. Without hesitation, she rushed forward, pulling him into a tight embrace that seemed to stretch on forever. James stood stiffly at first, unsure how to respond, but eventually, his arms wrapped around her and he let out a shaky breath. "I thought I'd lost you," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking. "I've been looking for you everywhere." James didn't reply immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes, savoring the feeling of being held by someone who truly cared about him. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to trust anyone, or even believe that anyone still cared. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I'm sorry." Evelyn pulled back slightly, studying his face through tear-filled eyes. "You don't have to apologize right now," she told him firmly, though her tone softened. "We'll figure everything out together. Just tell me what happened. Where have you been all this time?" Clara watched the exchange from a respectful distance, giving them space to reconnect. She knew this was a pivotal moment, not just for James, but for Evelyn too. Over coffee, James began piecing together fragments of his story, starting with the events that led to his disappearance. He spoke haltingly at first, struggling to find the right words, but Evelyn listened patiently, nodding encouragingly whenever he faltered. As the narrative unfolded, it became clear that their family's troubles ran deeper than either of them had wanted to admit. James explained how their father's company had fallen under scrutiny after allegations of corporate fraud surfaced. At the heart of the scandal was a web of deceit involving forged documents, embezzled funds, and shady business deals. Though James himself hadn't been directly implicated, his association with the company made him a target for investigators, and possibly others seeking revenge or leverage. Fearing for his safety, he decided to disappear, cutting ties with everyone he knew, including Evelyn. "I didn't want to drag you into it," James admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "I thought if I stayed away, you'd be safer. But then I got hurt and I couldn't remember anything. I woke up in the hospital and for months I didn't know who I was, or whether anyone was looking for me." Evelyn reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You should have trusted me," she said softly. "No matter what happened, I would have stood by you. You're my brother. That will never change." Her words struck a chord deep within James, stirring emotions he'd buried long ago. For years he'd carried the burden of protecting those he loved, believing that isolation was the only way to keep them safe. But now, sitting across from Evelyn, he realized how wrong he had been. Trust wasn't weakness, it was strength. And perhaps with her help, he could confront the mistakes of his past and start anew. As the afternoon wore on, Clara quietly excused herself, sensing that James and Evelyn needed time alone to heal old wounds and rebuild their relationship. Before leaving, she gave James a warm hug, whispering, "Take care of yourself, okay? And call me if you ever need anything." James nodded gratefully, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, Clara," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything." In the days that followed, James worked closely with investigators to untangle the mess surrounding his family's business. With Evelyn by his side, he faced difficult questions about his role in the company and the decisions he'd made before vanishing. Though some accusations lingered, it became clear that James had not been involved in the fraudulent activities directly. Instead, he had been caught in the crossfire, a pawn in a much larger game orchestrated by others. As the truth came to light, James made a bold decision. He would cooperate fully with authorities, providing whatever information he could to bring those responsible to justice. It wasn't an easy choice. Doing so meant exposing painful truths about people he once trusted, including former colleagues and friends. But James knew it was the right thing to do. For too long, he had run from his problems, hiding behind silence and fear. Now, he was ready to face them head-on. Evelyn supported him every step of the way, offering guidance and reassurance when doubt crept in. Together, they sifted through legal documents, bank statements, and emails, piecing together evidence that would exonerate James and hold the real culprits accountable. Their partnership was a testament to the resilience of sibling bonds, forged in hardship but strengthened by love. Throughout the process, James also began rebuilding his life outside the shadow of his family's legacy. With Evelyn's encouragement, he enrolled in therapy to address the trauma of his accident and the emotional toll of his prolonged silence. Slowly but surely, he regained confidence in himself, not just as a survivor, but as someone capable of making meaningful choices. He started volunteering at a local community center, teaching art classes to children, which brought him immense joy and fulfillment. The act of creating something beautiful reminded him of the resilience of the human spirit, a lesson he owed, in part, to Clara. Meanwhile, Clara continued her work at the hospital, inspired by the journey she had shared with James. His story had taught her the power of patience, compassion, and unwavering belief in the potential for change. Though she missed seeing him every day, she found solace in knowing that he was thriving, surrounded by people who loved and supported him. Occasionally, they exchanged messages, updating each other on their lives. In one particularly heartfelt note, James wrote, "You gave me a second chance at life, Clara. I'll never forget that." As weeks turned into months, James's name appeared less frequently in headlines, replaced by updates on the ongoing investigation into the corporate fraud case. Public interest waned, but for James, the fight was far from over. He testified in court, his voice steady and clear as he recounted the events leading up to his disappearance. His testimony played a crucial role in dismantling the corrupt network that had exploited his family's business for personal gain. By the time the trial concluded, James had emerged not as a victim, but as a symbol of redemption. Journalists praised his courage in stepping forward, while social media buzzed with admiration for his determination to set things right. Yet despite the attention, James remained humble, focusing on the future rather than dwelling on the past. One evening, as he sat on the porch of Evelyn's lakeside home, the very place he had described to Clara during their sessions, he felt a profound sense of peace. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, its surface calm and reflective. Beside him, Evelyn sipped tea, humming softly to herself. For the first time in years, James allowed himself to imagine a life free from fear and regret, a life built on honesty, trust, and connection. And though he knew challenges lay ahead, he faced them with newfound resolve. After all, he had already overcome the greatest obstacle of all, finding his voice again. As the months rolled on, James settled into a rhythm that felt almost foreign to him, a life of clarity and purpose, far removed from the chaos and fear that had once consumed him. The quiet serenity of Evelyn's lakeside home became a sanctuary where he could reflect, heal, and rebuild. Each day brought new opportunities to rediscover himself, not as the man who had fled his past, but as someone determined to create a better future. Evelyn played an integral role in this transformation. Her unwavering support gave James the courage to face not only the legal battles ahead but also the emotional scars he carried. Together, they spent hours talking by the lake, unraveling years of misunderstandings and rebuilding their bond. Evelyn shared stories about their childhood, reminding James of happier times when life felt simpler and less burdened by adult responsibilities. In turn, James opened up about his struggles during his time away, the loneliness, the guilt, and the fear of being found. These conversations weren't always easy, but they were necessary. With each shared memory and heartfelt apology, the siblings grew closer than ever before. James also threw himself into volunteer work at the community center, finding solace in teaching art to children. There was something profoundly healing about guiding young minds through the creative process, helping them express themselves without fear or judgment. Many of the kids reminded him of his younger self, curious, eager to learn, and full of untapped potential. Through them, James rediscovered his own passion for creativity, often spending evenings sketching landscapes or painting scenes inspired by the lake outside his window. Art became more than just a hobby. It was a form of therapy, a way to channel his emotions into something tangible and beautiful. Meanwhile, Clara remained a constant presence in his thoughts, even though their interactions were now limited to occasional messages. He often found himself reflecting on her kindness and the countless hours she had devoted to caring for him when he was at his lowest point. Her belief in him had been unwavering, even when he doubted himself. One evening, sitting alone on the porch with a cup of tea, James decided to write her a letter. A proper one, not just a quick text or email. He wanted to express his gratitude in a way that words typed on a screen couldn't capture. "Dear Clara," he began, his pen moving slowly across the page. "I don't think I'll ever be able to fully convey how much your care and compassion meant to me during those dark months. You didn't just help me regain my voice. You helped me find myself again. Because of you, I learned that trust isn't something to fear but something to cherish. And because of you, I have a second chance at life." He paused, staring out at the shimmering water as memories flooded back. The stormy nights, the music sessions, the countless moments of encouragement. His chest tightened with emotion, but he continued writing. "You taught me that no matter how broken we feel, there's always hope for healing. I carry that lesson with me every single day, and I know it will guide me as I move forward. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself, for seeing the person I was underneath all the silence." When he finished the letter, James folded it carefully and placed it in an envelope. He debated sending it immediately, but ultimately decided to wait until he could deliver it in person. Something about handing her the letter felt more meaningful, like closing a chapter of their journey together while leaving room for whatever might come next. Several weeks later, James made the trip back to the hospital, this time as a visitor rather than a patient. Walking through the familiar hallways stirred a mix of emotions: nostalgia, gratitude, and a lingering sense of vulnerability. Nurses greeted him warmly, surprised, yet delighted to see how far he'd come. When he finally reached Clara's station, she looked up from her paperwork, her eyes widening in surprise. "James!" she exclaimed, rising from her chair with a bright smile. "What are you doing here?" "I came to thank you properly," he replied, holding out the envelope. "This is for you." Clara took the envelope hesitantly, glancing at him with curiosity. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "Seeing you healthy and happy is thanks enough." "Maybe," James admitted with a small laugh. "But I needed to say it anyway. You changed my life, Clara. I'll never forget that." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their shared experience hung between them, unspoken yet palpable. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "How are things going with Evelyn? Have you two patched everything up?" James nodded, his expression softening. "We're getting there. It's not perfect, but it's real. And that's what matters. She's been amazing through all of this, just like you were." "That's wonderful. Clara said, her smile genuine. Family is everything. I'm so glad you two have each other. They spent the next hour catching up, sharing updates on their lives since James's departure. Clara told him about recent changes at the hospital, including new staff members and programs aimed at improving patient care. James listened intently, marveling at how effortlessly she balanced professionalism with warmth. By the end of their conversation, he realized how much he admired her, not just as a caregiver but as a person. Before leaving, James promised to stay in touch, vowing to visit whenever he was in town. As he walked out of the hospital, he felt a deep sense of closure. The place that had once symbolized his fragility now represented resilience and renewal. He glanced back one last time, waving at Clara, who stood watching him from the doorway. Their connection may have evolved, but its impact would remain forever etched in his heart. Back at the lake house, James immersed himself in planning his next steps. With the corporate fraud case resolved and his name cleared, he decided to pursue a career in advocacy, using his experiences to help others navigate similar challenges. He envisioned starting a foundation dedicated to supporting individuals, recovering from trauma, offering resources and mentorship to those in need. Evelyn wholeheartedly supported the idea, even volunteering to assist with fundraising efforts. As winter approached, James found joy in simple pleasures, cooking meals with Evelyn, taking long walks along the shore, and sketching scenes from nature. Life wasn't without its challenges, but he faced them with a newfound sense of optimism. The man who had once hidden in silence now embraced openness, trusting that honesty and vulnerability could lead to growth and connection. One crisp December morning, as snow began to dust the ground, James received a reply from Clara. Her note was brief, but heartfelt. Your letter touched me deeply, James. Knowing that I played a part in your journey fills me with immense pride. Keep shining your light, it's brighter than you realize. Holding the note in his hands, James smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace. He had come so far, from the silent stranger lying motionless in a hospital bed to the man standing confidently on the porch of his sister's home, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. And though his story was uniquely his own, it served as a reminder that no matter how lost we may feel, there is always hope for redemption, reconciliation, and renewal. With the wind whispering through the trees and the promise of spring on the horizon, James knew he was exactly where he was meant to be.